Fantastic. And then our presenter today is not Anthony Hood, as I mentioned earlier. It is Dr. David Redden, the immediate past chair for the Department of Biostatistics, and I believe current vice chair of the department.
The chair of vice.
And, longtime collaborator for our group, an excellent teacher, also a good friend. He was kind enough to fill in today on very short notice to get the talk that we wanted to have, but we were running out of weeks, so we were very excited that he was able to do this today. So without any more introduction, Dr. David Redden.
Okay. So what I was going to talk to you about today is, again, everybody's, I think, ironically, least favorite subject. People worry about the statistics. And what I'm going to talk about is I'm just going to give you an overview, because one of the things that I typically do, what my primary job for the campus is, and you will not believe me when I say this, is that I'm here to help people design any type of research study that they're out to investigate. It can be, I'm a jack of all trades. If you take a look at my CV, I have done studies ranging from education to surgery trials, to cancer trials, to health disparity trials, trying to figure out crime discrepancies. You name it, and generally people consult or collaborate with me. I prefer the term collaborate, so that we can get the design correct with regard to any investigation that we are seeking to either get funded or published. Those two things can be independent. You can publish in the absence of funding. Don't forget that. But nevertheless, they may come back and ask you about how rigorous the design was. And one of the things that people judge how rigorous the design is by how well can you justify the number of individuals or the number of subjects that went through your trial or that you have in your data set. They will ask you crazy questions that seem to make no sense whatsoever, such as what is your statistical power or what is your effect size. What I would like to be able to do today is I'm not going to turn you into PhD biostatisticians. I'm not certain I would turn myself into one if I had to do it over again. But I would like to get you the vocabulary. I would like you to actually understand the concepts and get grounded in that, so that when the time comes for you to start designing something, or on a team you're helping to design something, you understand at the fundamental level what's going on behind the scenes. Because I will tell you the truth. I assume, Brian, I'm being recorded, that I don't mean this bad. I would say I believe 90% of all my collaborators take my calculations on face value and have no idea what the calculation actually means. I want you to, and believe it or not, I can, in an hour and a half, teach you everything you need to know about power, and you will never forget it, and you'll never get it wrong again. It's kind of like my very fundamental discussion about p-values. Everybody gets confused about p-values. P-values are just evidence. That's all they are. It's evidence of a jury trial. That's all it is. It can't prove. You have to make a decision with it. When you see the rule of p-value is less than or equal to alpha, which is what it's called in statistics, we should just to say, we should write it out as evidence beyond reasonable doubt. It's the exact same logic. But there's another logic behind power calculations. And I want to go through that and just get you, and I promise you, guess what? There won't be a single formula on the board. There will never be a formula up there, because I think we do disservice when we drag people through the formulas, because we lose the concepts. So we're going to go through an example of power for two-group comparison of means, two-group comparisons of proportions, ANOVA, and the chi-square. That's rather ambitious, but those are, honestly, what I'm called on to design almost every week. But this weekend I'll have 3 of these to calculate out and send out to people. Some of them are going to be much harder than I want them to be. So that's an old slide, and you can see I didn't do a great job. I want to talk about why it is not the first thing to discuss. It's a key thing. I'm not joking. I can walk down that street. I'm not joking with you about this. I'll walk down that street, and people will stop me and say, hey, Dave, I'm about to do a study. How many people do I need? Well, I can keep it on the top of my head. 30. Yeah, no, right. 3. No. Like I have it on the top of my head. No, it's a much more important conversation. If you're going to design something, I'm going to tell you the most important part of the design. The conversation. You do not build good studies in a vacuum. There is a dialogue among individuals. There's a dialogue among the team. You have to, believe it or not, educate me. I have to understand, what are you measuring? We can't start there. I'm useless. You have to take the time to educate me. But all statistical power is, it is simply a description. I'm describing something. I'm describing the description of possible experimental outcomes for which we are likely to get a p-value less than or equal to 0.05. Or that we are likely to declare that we have found evidence at the end of the trial that indicates drug A is superior to drug B. Or that therapy A is better than therapy B. Okay? Or it can be written as a description of sample sizes needed so that we are likely to declare the experiment or the intervention had a meaningful effect. Notice I did deliberately bold certain things. It is a description. Whenever I write a power calculation, it's not a guarantee of anything. I'm not guaranteeing anything. If we could guarantee it, why are we doing the experiment? If we already know the answer. It's always a future experiment. It is the possible outcomes. We have no guarantee how the outcomes will be. The first word of every power calculation I write is assuming. You have to help me know, are those assumptions reasonable? Okay? And then here's the piece that really frustrates people. I can't tell you what a meaningful effect is. That's why there has to be a conversation. I cannot tell you what a clinically meaningful difference is. You want to know why? Because I'm a mathematician, not a clinician. I can't say that. I need a conversation. I can guide you purely by mathematics of what is detectable. But it may not be meaningful, or it could be so huge that people would laugh at you for anticipating something that large. So we have to be able to discuss these things out. This is typically, this meaningful effect is what some individuals would term the effect size. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I would typically design something. What I would, if you were collaborating with me after I understood the outcomes, what you should expect, and hopefully lead you through how to interpret it. All right? But here it is, what it is not. It is not the first thing to be worried about. And I will guarantee you, it is always when I go into the room, before we even start talking about what's being measured, it happened yesterday in this room. I came in for a collaboration, a very large grant that they're hoping to get out in October, and the very first question was, how many subjects do I need? To which I said, I have no clue. What are you measuring? And we have to go back always. What is being measured? It is at earliest, it is the third thing to consider in the conversation. I would argue sometimes it's even probably down even to the fifth thing. But the two things I really need to know, what are you measuring and how many groups do you have? Okay, those are the two things I really need to know up front. please understand it's not a guarantee of success. Even if I wrote you a power calculation that has 99% power, it's still a set of assumptions. Any of those assumptions, when I'm off, the power calculation is off. That's why I don't hand over one power calculation. After the first collaboration or the first discussion, I'll come back and I'll present a grid and say, here are the assumptions across the top. I'm changing them. Here are the sample sizes. Here's what we can do. Let's discuss what's financially reasonable within the budget and try to cover as much of this territory as we can to have a robust calculation. Yes, Jeff?
What are some of the assumptions that you may change in this grid?
All right, so one thing, you're not going to know. You can't be certain what effect you'll have. So I'll come in and say, well, David, we believe that if we do this treatment, we're going to drop blood pressure by 5 units. Okay, good guess. It's a guess. It's a swag. You know what swag is? And it's not the stuff they give you at the end of a 5K. What's a swag?
Scientific wild-ass guess.
It's a scientific wild-ass guess. It's a scientific wild-ass guess. You're just pulling it straight out of the air. Yep.
You can find other studies.
But they're still random variables.
And
You never step in the same river twice.
right, but if you can maybe
Confidence interval it.
take a range and then shoot for a median.
That's what I do, but I really like putting that. I'll show you these grids in a minute. That it'll help people see, and actually it helps me if you're I'll tell you what, I usually give that grid if we get a review from a journal that says we'd like to discuss with you power. I tend to send them that grid, mainly because they realize, well, they've got a statistician sitting on that study. And and we recognize that they're having serious conversations about it. I like giving that grid to study section also when we submit for funding, because again, it shows them how robust, even if some of our assumptions are off, as long as we're still above a reasonable threshold of maybe 80%, they're calm, they'll be cool with it, okay? So let me go through those, but then again, I'm not going to pull my punch, because I will tell you, people will say, well, I can't understand the mathematics of it. That's bull crap. Okay, the reason you feel that often you can't understand the mathematics of it is most people try to teach it to you the wrong way. They try to teach it through formulas and not graphs. If we can go through graphs, it'll make it so much clearer. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through graphs. Okay, you got to define your hypotheses. Look, folks, I am useless to you until we have a hypothesis. You got to be able to tell me, what are you trying to measure? How are you going to measure it? Why should things always think about your outcomes? Think about your outcomes. How are things going to be measured? Think about what observed changes would convince you that your research hypothesis is true. Remember, by default, your research hypothesis will always be your alternative hypothesis. We'll state two in every study we design. The null, equivalent to innocent in a jury trial. The research hypothesis, which is the alternative hypothesis, the one that we want to prove, equivalent to the guilty verdict, which is the other hypothesis in a jury trial. You always are looking for evidence. No prosecutor is ever called to present evidence of innocence. Innocence is assumed to be true. The evidence must be an indication of guilt. Same thing with your data. You're hoping that your data provides the evidence in favor of your research hypothesis. After considering those things, and even if you're not certain, I didn't say having an answer to all those things, after you've considered it, that's the time to get to a statistician or a method. Again, I do not believe that biostatisticians have the union card over everything that we do on this campus. get to a methodologist. Get to someone who has been trained through several of these things. They don't have to be biostatisticians. They can be epidemiologists. It can come out of healthcare organization and policy. It can come out of health behavior. There are biostatisticians sitting in the cancer center. There's methodologists sitting in cardiovascular. They're all trained to help you with these things. Get to a methodologist to start framing it out. So first remember, and I'm going to walk you through this. And then I'll get you the graph that will help you never forget what's going on, okay? And if you can draw these graphs, which you'll be able to, you won't be able to get the precise number, but you'll be able to remember everything I tried to convince you of today. You'll remember it all. I promise you. Because it's all in the graph. Two hypotheses that come from the specific gains. We have to assume, so let's just we're going to do a BMI study. I'm going to make something up. We're going to we're going to give them the magic pill. This magic pill that we've all been looking for to lose weight. Don't think that's going to be out there, but that's okay. My mother had it. She had a magnet on the refrigerator. She said it's the magic diet. It's guaranteed to make certain you lose weight. The magic diet was, if it tastes good, spit it out. That was my mother's magic diet. The null hypothesis would be, suppose that we are going to come in and we're going to recruit people that are overweight, slightly obese. So we would anticipate that our population would be, both populations would be centered at 30. Okay? And we are going to anticipate that we're going to give one of them an intervention and we're going to alter the mean of the other group. And you see what I have done. I've had to assume, you will hear me say that word several times to drive the point home. I'm making an assumption. I have anchored the null at 30. I can anchor it anywhere. I just have to make the two means the same. Now, I had to put Greek on the board because that's the truth. Remember, I am playing mathematical games at this point. There's no data. We haven't had any data yet. So everything stays in the Greek because the Greek indicates what's going on in the assumed probability distribution. That's what the calculation's about. It's about what we're assuming, not the data. Was there a hand up or? No, that's about any question, sorry.
No.
Okay. Then I have to be able to make the alternative. I have to make two statements. One that declares the null is true, and one that I will have to work with under which that statement, the alternative is true. So I just arbitrarily said 27.5. I'm going to drop from 2.5 BMI units. Here's the graph that'll teach you everything you ever need to know about power. Why they can't put this in the textbook, I don't know. Okay? If they would put this in the textbook, it would demystify everything and everybody would calm down. The top graph is what's being assumed under the null. Okay? There were two gentlemen back in the 1920s and 30s by the name of Neyman and Pearson. They came up with an approach called the rejection region approach. They did not use p-values. What they said to do for a hypothesis test is draw your curve, and if you're going to use a type 1 error rate of 0.05, put a little bit of that probability in the upper tail, and put a little bit of that probability in the lower tail, and if your data falls in that rejection region, you should
Reject.
obvious. If it's in the rejection region, reject. And because it's under the null, you have set your type 1 error rate to 0.05 or whatever it is. You just put that probability in the tail. Now I'm going to go a little technical on you. The type 1 error rate is the probability you reject the null, given the null is true. The power is the exact same thing with one little slip. The probability of rejecting the null given the alternative is true. So you have to use the same rejection region. Notice the green lines fall straight down between the two graphs, but I have a second distribution, the one that was defined under the alternative, under this scenario. The top one aligns with the null, the bottom aligns with the research hypothesis. Now, if I had a magic marker, then I could shade, because I would shade this little region and this little region to find my type 1 error. I would have to shade this region, and technically there's a little sliver down here. That region and that region is power. That's the power calculation. All you're doing is you're sliding distributions around. And if you make your effect size bigger, this would move over here toward our right, and more of the area, more of the distribution would fall above the green line. So as you move and create bigger or imagine bigger effect sizes, what has to happen to your power? It always goes up. Okay? The other magic button that I have, I can study bigger effect sizes, but I can also, like a microscope, through the sample size, make the variance collapse. And as the variances collapse and become tighter, and my areas change, I can also increase power. So those are the two things I work with you when I'm trying to do a power calculation. We'll talk about, well, if I increase the sample size by 50, we can get this much more power. If we increase it by 10 subjects, we get this much more power. But the key thing is just remember to imagine these two types of graphs. Draw the bell curve, drop two verticals, and then start moving the distribution underneath, another distribution underneath it. And that's showing you how power works. That's the great mystery. That's why people want to keep me on the campus, because I understand that. That's all it is. There's nothing harder than that. And the reason people get confused is they want to bring in p-values. You guys have nothing to do with power. It was all developed under rejection region. Power can be interpreted as my probability of getting a p-value less than alpha, less than or equal to alpha, but it was never intended to be interpreted that way. It wasn't the way it was designed. So let's do one. Let's just do a calculation. Notice I have to start out with, assume that we have a common standard deviation. I have to understand how variable the data is. This is one of those assumptions I may have to vary. You may come to me and say, hey Dave, I've got one drug that's estimated to be 5, I got another one that's estimated to be 10. I don't know which one to keep giving me both. And what I'll probably do is run it from 5 up to 15 and just study it. We'll use the standard type 1 error rate of 0.05. There's nothing magical in that. And let's just be honest. Sometimes I come in, and then let's be real. I am the mathematician. I'm the statistician. Sometimes the budget rules the day, you know? And they come to me and say, you know what, this is my startup account. I don't think I can get more than 30 people per crew. All right, let's see what we got. And we go from there. Okay, now so if we do that, I would recommend this. I want to say something. I changed my slide yesterday. because I changed the slide because I pointed toward an online power calculator that you could go in and put this information in, boom, and you'll get the answer. After a few years of having daughters, and recognizing that they come to me and say, is that true? No, dear, that's not true. Just because you found it on the internet doesn't mean it's true. Be careful. I think that you can have an understanding of how to do everything. And you should have the gumption and the drive. And never be afraid of trying to teach yourself something and figure it out for yourself. And go online and put this information in and get an estimate. Just have someone confirm it for you. Because there are a lot of online calculators that are wrong. Now, the software we use in the department is PASS 14.0. I'm not asking you to go buy that. The departmental license for everybody in biostats was $12,000. Yeah, I know, and the single licenses are like now $1,500 a year. I know, but still. It's like buying a battleship and putting it in Lake Market. You're not going to need that battleship, okay? It really is. I mean, it has more than you really need.
Hey, David?
Yeah?
What do you think about G-Power?
G-Power, I'm okay with. I feel like they made it a little bit less clear than they needed to. And that's unfortunate. I'm fine with G-Power. I'm fine with a lot of the online calculators, but I will try. I tell you the truth. I have written the code myself and verified almost every, I go out and I'm just worried about those types of things. I make certain that either I can verify I can verify PASS's calculations by building my own code. But it's just one of those things where meet with, again, there are plenty of very good ones. SAS has power calculators built into it. G-Power's out there. Just take the time to confirm. Meet with somebody. Because I've been in meetings where there have been 3 biostatisticians and three different estimates on the same assumptions. And we had to figure out why are these slightly off from each other. So I come in and I put in my difference of my means, my common standard deviations. I put all this on the software, you would get the power, and I got a power of 0.4779. First, let me ask you a question. Again, I'm trying to educate you I'm also trying to be very mindful of our time. On a two-tailed test, okay, what's the max power you can get? Maximum power. Power should be, if you see a power, I'll tell you this joke on the side real quick. I interviewed at a university, got called down, and they were interested in, several years ago, asking me to be department chair, and I was standing there waiting to meet with the dean, and I was looking at all the posters on the wall, and I'm looking at these posters in the school, and I'm looking and studying these posters, and I noticed p-values of 1.2, 1.3. P-values of 1.2? P-values of 1.3? Not possible. Probability is trapped at 1. You can't get a probability above 1. Power is a probability. Can't go above 1. Okay? What's the smallest probability you should ever have for power on a two-tailed test? Is it 0? No. So when I have surgeons or MDs who come to me and say power is 0, I say you've got to walk that back. You cannot tell me they had no power. The minimum power on a two-tailed test is bounded by your alpha. It can't go below whatever you set. It can't go below 0.05. Even it cannot do it mathematically. So that's not a good power. You barely got a 50-50 shot of finding that if it's out there. Now, I will tell you, I think one of the reasons I say get to a methodologist. Always get to a methodologist. I say this to the PhD biostatistician, graduate students all the time. You may have it all right, and if you can't explain it, it's useless. And if you do a power calculation and you're trying to convince a journal that you did it right, but they can't understand what you're saying, or they can't replicate it, they're not going to believe it. Same thing for a study section. You cannot, if they can't replicate it, if they can't go to the software and do it themselves, then they're not going to believe it. Yes?
You have it expressed here as a percent, so is that typically an acceptable way to instead of 0.8 or 0.4 or whatever, that's the percent chance of the guilty verdict, essentially? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. But the key thing here is I'm telegraphing several things. It's a two-tailed hypothesis. I've reported the alpha. I've reported the standard deviation. I've reported the total sample size, then said per group, and then said, what's the difference to get the power? I have distinctly put everything there that anybody would need to recreate that calculation. That's the key thing. And you can often tell when you're being a journal reviewer or you're being pulled in by a study section. You can tell when a methodologist was asked to help, and you can tell when the methodologist was not in the room, because there'll be pieces missing. And if pieces are missing, I can't replicate it. Okay?
Quick question.
Sure. I like conversation. I should have said that earlier. I like being interrupted,
For that
actually.
example, and I'm not sure what the level of understanding of power, before you began, some people may have heard this a long, long time ago.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Correct. So for a power calculation data of about less than 50%.
Would never report it. No. I would not. I would come back to you and say, we need to continue designing. We need to continue to discuss things. Because I would come back to you and say, if you're bounded by that 30 per group, we either need to figure out how to drive variance down and get better precision, or we've got to figure out, can we do something in your intervention to create a bigger effect? Because I would not ever, I've been at Soul Study Section for decades now. The lowest I've ever seen anything approved that had a power calculation, the lowest I've ever seen get through study section is 70%, and I was banging the table over my dead body. And I lost because the clinicians were like, oh, you're just being stubborn. The reason I was so upset about it, they put the alpha at 15%. It was a huge game. Go ahead. Question?
I'm lost with my question. I don't remember where I was going back.
My anticipation of where you were going is what is a reasonable power level?
No, that was not it.
Okay, darn it.
But the point was we're taking. So in terms of takeaways, and correct me if I'm wrong, traditional industry standard is a type 1 error of about 0.05.
That's true. There's no denying that.
Traditional industry standard for power is about 80%.
That is correct. That's 80%. That's correct.
And if you are in a situation like that, agree, don't report it, do something else. But you can reframe your study as this is going to be a pilot study.
Agreed.
We're going to get a little bit more of the better estimates of the standard deviations.
That's exactly, and that's
for
it.
a pilot study. So you could reframe that after they talk to the methodologists. Would you agree with that statement?
Agreed. And I agree because I had a separate talk where I discussed pilots. And if you cannot truly achieve the statistical power, then go and come back and say, well, let's invest the money to get better estimates. At least let's go on and demonstrate feasibility. Can I get to the population? Can I work out my instruments? And in the process, collect the data to provide preliminary estimates of variance within this population. And there are clever ways, if you're meeting with the right statistician, there's a thing called the internal pilot, that if you really have a very good design and you're not tinkering with your instruments, and that you're not going to tinker with your inclusion-exclusion criteria, you can take that first piece and roll it into the future study. You just got to make an adjustment in your p-value. But it's all right. I would agree with that 100%. But I'm going to emphasize this. We could come in and say, well, wait a minute. What if I have to have 80% power? I usually don't design studies at 80% power anymore. I did very early in my career. I just stayed with the levels that were, as stated, that accepted by FDA, that's which is accepted by NIH, that's what is accepted by industry. I now typically design at 90% power or 85% power. You know why? Because it gives me a little bit of buffer room to be wrong. And I'm typically wrong on my assumptions. So if I'm off, I've got wiggle room. I've got slack. So under this scenario, I jacked up power to 80%, but what I chose to do is I had to say, all right, we're not going to really get by with a 2.5. You're really going to have to go out to like a 3.688 to be able to get there. You got to get above almost 3.7 units apart before I could drive. But what did I do? What did I just do? Let's back up to that slide. All I did was take this and move the distribution to the right until I had 80% of the bottom curve in the shaded region. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do those reasoning games. All right? I always think I can go faster than I do. And the other thing is, if you came back to me and said, no, David, I need 2.5. All right. The other lever I can pull, I'm just trying to illustrate, there's many ways I can move the calculation with assumptions. David, I want 2.5. Okay. If it's 2.5, I want you to give me 64 per group. That's the other way to get to 80% power. Okay? So I have many ways to get there, but we have to negotiate that. And yes, the word is negotiate. As a team, reason it out. When the outcome is dichotomous, yes, no. Hypertensive, yes, no. Proportions are typically used as my statistics. Everybody loves it because it's an easier power calculation, because all you got to do is give me the two proportions and I can sit down and do all the calculations. You don't have to make the assumptions about the variance. You don't have, because of the variance, you give me the proportion. By stats theory, I've got it. All I need to know is where are the proportions. Provides all the information. I hate these calculations because everybody just, they cry when I show them this. Suppose I wanted to, same game, it's the exact same game, exact same curves, same game, nothing new here. Draw me two bell curves, slide them around, we'll look at our power, we'll work it out. Suppose I have 20%, I want to create a study where the response is, I don't know, we give you a pill and you turn blue. I don't know, 20 and 30. That seems like a reasonably big jump. Going from 20% of one population having this event to 30% in the other, of the drug B having the event. I need a total sample size of 588 individuals to find that. When you go down to proportions, sample sizes grow quick, very quick. So if you can give me a continuous measure, something that is a true number, some quantity that I can use as an outcome, that's better. If you can't, that's fine. We're just going to have to go get that funded, and it's going to be a multi-year study. All right? And again, I'm not even getting into survival, which is another level of power calculation. Okay, but this is one of the ones, this is something that I would typically sit down and meet with somebody about. This is something that actually Ken Sack, who all of his people just left by, Ken Sag was the one that actually, over the years of collaborating with him, conditioned me to provide this, where he didn't want to, he wanted to sit down and see the grids. And this is perfect. This is a very good thing in the sense that I can vary my effect size across the top. Suppose I can create a 2.5 unit change between the two groups. Suppose I could make a 3.5. Suppose I could make a 4.5. Suppose I really don't know the variables. I should have put a Greek symbol there. I didn't. 2.5, 5, and 7.5. You can see the different power levels. Here, technically, it is 0.99999, but I decided to go over rapid. You can see from the table several things. Look at the middle row. Consistently, as effect size grows, what must be true about your power? It always has to go up. The bigger the difference you can make for a fixed sample size, the higher your power will be. But if your data gets noisier and noisier, because the variance is just how much noise is in the data, how variable is it? As the variability goes up, what happens to your power? It goes down because it requires more individuals to focus the microscope to overcome the variability. That's literally the way you can think about it. As your sample sizes go up, you're focusing a microscope so that you are able to detect smaller and smaller things. Okay? So, moving on. And in fact, in about 4 minutes, I'm going to give you a break. In fact, I'm going to give you the break right now. Let's take a break right now. Take a 8-minute break. Okay? And then we'll pick up. Yes, you got a question? No question? No question. 8-minute break. And then we'll finish up at 9:30.
Sorry, my third year next week.
You're in pharmacy school? You know, yeah, what year? I'll do third year. Okay. Said, where we from? You were in the yeah.
She's the one? Yep.
Yeah. When she went to it's a fellowship. You plan on doing residency? Yeah. Great one. I'm really excited. Yeah.
Just And he was the happy part of our, I was worried early views or something. And he said, can I see you up there? Stay here for the summer, Carolyn? Sorry. Anything, sorry. I'm kind of going to be your grade here for the summer, enrollments or I'm spring. Are you thought about that? New Orleans, I've been over there. I know. Beautiful. It's so pretty. Yes, my maiden name is. I have Mary, I'm graduated as well. Big guy. Yeah, that's easier to do. Yeah, y'all ever do anything or, you know, always have to know. I'm excited to see you guys. Germany, yeah. But it'll probably later that night. Yeah, anyway, honestly, we just had, an issue, like, so, I
So the fundraising will have a way David's not approving anything consulting yet.
I'm so confused about the. It's kind of.
I need a shot of motivation. Literally. I'm in the middle of the summer, my wife is there. with the, and it's just, I'm right in the middle of summer, I don't have much motivation. Somebody,
Yeah, we know that.
it's letter of recommendation by 10:30. Okay, well, it'll be close.
Yeah.
It'll be close. We'll make it.
Yeah.
No, it's all right. Summer, I want us to take the time to be around girls.
Yeah, that's important.
I've got a girl that my oldest is a senior now. So we are looking at colleges. She's looking at Auburn, she's looking at Georgia, she's looking at Clemson. My comments are I would like her to stay, I don't care where she goes, money's not the issue. The issue is, I would like her to be at least in a 4-hour radius. That way, if daddy needs to get to one of the girls, he can. And I really do not want y'all seeing me on the nightly news strangling somebody at an airport.
Well, let me, I can connect her with my mom.
I will. All right, so let's keep going. Sometimes, again, I told you earlier, it matters if you tell me the number. I need to know the type of outcome, and I need to know the number of groups. Because if you get above 2 groups, I've got to switch methods. Because if I go to more than 2 groups and you say, okay, now I want to compare, David, I'd like to compare 3 groups. Okay. And it's continuous, David. We're still going to be studying weight, blood pressure, cholesterol, and I've got 3 groups. Well, then I've got to go to a method called analysis of variance. Now, this is one of the games we play with our undergraduates and our first-year graduate students is, if it's analysis of variance, clearly the hypothesis test must be about variances. No. It's a bait and switch, okay? It's a bait and switch. ANOVA still studies the mean. But if all 3 means are equal, what's the variance of the means? 0. If 3 things are equal, there's no variability among those things. There's no variance. That's why we call it analysis of variance. How much variance can we attribute to groups? Okay? And if I make one of those means differ, now some of the variability is attributable to the changes in those mean levels. That's the whole game. Well, that seems rather complicated, David. Well, let's play our game again, okay? All you got to do is give me an alternative hypothesis. You could say, and it doesn't really matter what you set the means at under the null, just make them all equal. You can make them 30, 30, 30. You can make them 25, 25, 25. That's fine. You could make them 20, 20, 20. Doesn't matter to me. They all map to a variance of 0. Whereas these numbers, when I start looking at them, no, they have variability. And because they have variability, there are group differences, and now I can study power. Note the combinations is just one of an infinite number. That's one thing I need to keep in mind. Power is a game. It's a bunch of assumptions. Don't be that bad. It's a distributional game. Let me ask you something. What do you think is going to happen to power if I go 30, 30, 29.9999999? Is the alternative true? Yes, the alternative is true. What do you think your power is going to be? Trap. Warning you. I want to see how much you heard in the first half. What's the power going to be? 0.05. Barely above 0.05. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. You heard me. Thank you. It's not 0. It's going to be barely above your type 1 error rate. Okay? But suppose I did this. Suppose I did 30, 25, 5. What happens to power? Throws up way high. really quick because you created a big set of variances among the means. So it's a matter of us working together to find out what would be clinically relevant. And that's the longest conversation I ever have in a power calculation. Longer than anything else. Help me know what is relevant. I'm just throwing out examples here. Sometimes you have to find that from literature. Sometimes you have to find that from discussing with colleagues. Okay, so we're going to do this. You could assume the other possibilities, but I want to get to this picture. That's the correct picture for an ANOVA. ANOVAs don't follow the bell. Okay, not the standard normal. They follow what's called an F distribution. Okay? I'm not trying to get a PhD biostatisticians. I'm just telling you your cut point is sitting right here. If I'm doing a test and the red is the null, I'm going to stand here in the silence for a minute. I constructed this test, this power calculation, to have a type 1 error rate of 0.05. How much can I shade in that region, and what is that number equal to? This is the null. This is the beginning of the rejection region. The rejection region is always defined to have how much probability in it. The type 1 error rate. So this little, if I had a magic marker that worked on Brian's nice TV, I could shade that and there would be a 5% probability, or 0.05 area in there, because that's what we represent probability as area underneath a curve. My question to you is, what is, if I shaded the green underneath the green, what's that? That's my power. And as I change, this is the cool thing, as I change my assumptions, the red line never changes, folks. The red line never changes. It's fixed. The changing of the assumptions alters the shape of the distribution of the alternative. And as I make different assumptions, I'm literally shoving and bending that curve into finding out how much is falling above my cut point. That's all I'm doing. By changing sample sizes, by changing effect sizes, I can warp and shove the green line around. That's all I do. But all you're doing is you've got that one cut point by which you're considering things to move around. All right? So, catch here, same game. This is the way I write every power calculation for an ANOVA, one-way ANOVA, that I ship out for NIH. This is not a great power calculation. In a one-way ANOVA, sample sizes of 30 per group for 3 groups. Total sample size of 90. Provide 61.6% power to detect differences among hypothesized means, 30, 25, and 20. Using an F-test at 0.05 significance level. Notice something, I did not say two-tailed. ANOVA is not two-tailed. A variance is a squared estimate. It cannot go negative. I square everything in these calculations. So all evidence is thrown into an upper tail. So I just have to say a significance level, not a two-tailed. The size of the variation is represented by their standard deviation of 4.08. So I literally say to them, this is what that variance or that standard deviation is. And then I said the background standard deviation that is due to individuals and not due to group is assumed to be 15. That gives everybody the ability to figure out exactly what is going on. All right? And somebody could be able to replicate it. I know it's dry, but it helps a lot. The other game is, here's what I do. All right? I want you to study that graph or study that table and just talk to me. I'm not as, I may be loud, but I'm not mean. most of the time. So just talk, what do you see in that graph or in that table? I have fixed my sample sizes, 30 subjects per treatment, and alpha 0.05. Why is the power calculation going up as I move left to right? Talk to me.
Effect size.
The sigma's not my effect size.
A variance.
The variance is going what?
1%.
Right. And I'm focusing my microscope. In a way, I kind of tricked you. I reversed the order of the variances, or the standard deviation, to see if you were paying attention to that. Okay? So you see that. And you see, notice something. Look here. 30, 25, 20, but this is 30, 25, 25. There's less variability among these means. These spread out further. These are held close together. You see the power drops. There's less variability in that set of means than there is in that set of means. And just like you would expect, because you've got less variance, this is a smaller effect size, this dropped. Is there a typo in there? Is there something in that table that makes you think, hey, Dave, you just made a stupid blankety blank mistake? Do you think there's a mistake in there? Does there something seem odd?
The last two rows are the same, but you're 25, 25, 30 versus 30, 30, 25.
So,
So
you're right. Finish it. Finish it. Or
the,
somebody help. She's right. No, Catherine, you're out.
I just have that question.
Okay, but let them finish. What were you going to tell me?
well, the variance between the two groups would be I don't know, some of the meanings.
All right, let me help you.
Perfect, love it.
Let me help you. What is being tried, what's being stated here is there's not a mistake. It looks like a mistake. The variance here, the residual variance is 15. Those effect sizes are the same. The variability between 30, 25, and 25 is the same variability of 30, 32, 25. There's more than one set of means that's going to create the same power calculation. That's all I'm trying to say, is that it all depends. That's why I sit down and discuss with people, because a lot of times, you know, it's not uncommon that I'm in a meeting and somebody says, well, let's change this one to see if see if our power goes up. I look at them and go, you don't understand what we're doing. If you set two, they're going to come to the same place. I just want you to understand you're exactly right. It's hard to see an effect size in a NOVA, but it all comes down to the variance of those means, of those group means. And if that variance comes out to be the same, there will be identical power. Yes, Catherine?
So another thing that you commonly see, you say assumed common standard deviation. That's the same thing as like what some people refer to as pooled variance.
Yes.
If you go back to your previous slide, then I think you do have a typo. So it says within a group, common standard deviation within a group would seem to be 15. Would that mean within the entire sample or across groups?
A NOVA is analysis of variance, not analysis of variances. There's never a plural.
You have within, you mean between
With,
or
no,
across or?
no, I mean within.
Within a...
There is one variance for every group. That is a standard assumption of a NOVA. That if you go and you look, we have to assume the two sample t-tests you can assume in unequal variances. A NOVA, the underlying assumption is every group has the same variance, residual variance, and that gives them a common within group variance.
So I just wanted to clarify for some people, so when you have a control group who's receiving nothing, you're saying that any two treatment groups that may be in this kind of three-group study.
The only thing I'm shifting is that means.
Is that variance around whatever outcome you're measuring is going to be the same as if they received no treatment, which is rarely actually true in real life.
But and in the truth, there are adjustments that we can make We train people to take it again. I don't believe, I've tried to avoid p-values like the plague in this talk. I don't check that assumption with a p-value. I check that assumption by looking at a graph. And if there is an egregious deviation from that assumption, I will come in and build what's called a robust approximation to it. But this is, again, that's one of those things, I would not build that into the power calculation. I would not build that in, because then I would lose study section too quick. I would, if I am worried about that concern that Catherine just brought up, I discussed that in the analysis plan. Keep in mind, the statistician's not only, the methodologist is not only going to help you write the power calculation for your study, they should also be helping you write the analysis plan. How will the data be analyzed before the experiment is? That should be set. And we should also help be, most often overlook helping discuss the data management plan. But you can't collect the data and record it correctly, statistician's not going to be much help. Well, yeah, we will, but we will be gnashing our teeth. So we go down. If I wanted to get up to 80% power, I would need to drive my sample size all the way up to 135. If those are the means you really want to go and study, and you want to design an experiment to get to 80% power, you have to continue. Notice I did not change the distribution of the means, so none of the lower piece changes. None of it. And again, an accidental typo or carry forward, but it's key here, 30 subjects per treatment. One of the things that we get very frustrated in study section is we can't decide, are you talking about per treatment or total? Make certain that you delineate those. Or if it's not clear, I've had PhD level statisticians turn in power calculations, and we go through the scientific review committee before it goes out, or we have it in a pilot program or a panel program, and we have to come back and say, this has to be clarified. All right, same example. What about more complex designs? What if I decide I've got to, suppose one treatment is type, and you have 3 types, water aerobic, standard aerobics, weight training. Suppose treatment 2 is a randomization between 2 drugs. That sounds horrible. Guess what? You already know everything you need to know. I lost a slide somewhere in here. Yeah, I did. That sounds horrible. You already know everything you need to know. Right? Think about this. All you've got to be able to do for me here is you've got 3 on treatment 1, 2 levels on treatment 2. We're going to have to sit down and build a grid of 6 means. We've got to be able, because you've got 3 levels of exercise and 2 drugs. That implies there are 6 groups. And I just need to know, the null would say, all 6 groups. If we're going to say neither one of them have an effect, they all got the exact same mean. And then we have to hypothesize very carefully how big of a gap will we see due to the drug, and how big are the gaps that we would see due to the exercise treatments. We would just have to be very careful with that. But it would all fall back, believe it or not, to that exact same graph. And I'd be able to produce graphs like that to show you what power you would have. All right? And then if I can do that with means, I can, of course, do that with proportions. Chi-square is the analogous to ANOVA. Chi-square is analogous to ANOVA in the sense that chi-square tries to compare groups on proportions. ANOVA compares groups on continuous means. That's all it is. But it's the same, it's not identical game. I would have to come in and propose 3 different proportions, or I could do 2 different proportions. Technically, I could do 0.20, 0.30, 0.30, but there has to be some variability in the proportions in the alternative. Always remember, the alternative must be made true. Therefore, you've got to create variance among the groups in the alternative, but it's not the exact same graph, but I tell you it's very similar. I would draw not F distributions, I would draw what's called a chi-square distribution. It would have, it almost looks like a camel, and the alternative would be very similar to the green line here. And I would start manipulating my assumptions and seeing how much of the green line or the green distribution I could shove into the rejection region under different assumptions. Okay, and that's 306, and you can see here, talk to me about, interpret the table for me. We're 2 slides away from being dismissed 15 minutes early. Talk to me about this. What do you see? And why does this make sense? Always start with the columns. I'm moving my sample size up. As sample size goes up for a fixed effect, what would you anticipate? Power goes up. Bottom line, if you give me more subjects, you give me more power. Why did the power drop between these 2 lines? Between those 2 rows? Why did the power drop? Sample size is fixed. It's 240 people. Why did power drop? The effect was smaller. Exactly. Which has more spread? 0.2 to 0.3 to 0.4 or 0.20 to 0.25 to 0.3? You're covering a bigger range in the first row, which is giving you a bigger effect size. Second row has the smaller effect size. All I'm trying to do is ingrain into your head. He's going to want to talk about effect sizes. He's going to want to talk about the number of people. He's going to want to talk to you about the outcomes. He's going to want to talk to you about the number of groups. Those things are crucial for the power calculation, but those cannot be answered until what? We first have to have a what? A hypothesis. Somebody's going to stop me on the street going back to Riles in 10 minutes to say, what's my power? And I'm going to be like, can you come by and meet with me on Monday and bring me your specific aims? Especially with grants, power calculations will be replicated. I was on the study section 2 weeks ago. Exactly what was said. It was a small business innovation award. They knew they were not going to have statistical power. They showed me a power calculation and said, this is what we can afford. This is the true effect we believe we can create. We recognize that we need to continue to refine our study, collect information. They indicated a power, but they said we want to come in as a pilot study because we know that we're going to use this to design a well-informed future study. There's nothing wrong with that. Before it goes in, anything, before you go in, have somebody sit down, have an independent methodologist sit down and just look at it to make certain, and this is what I do. If I'm at a panel, anytime you're designing anything, no matter how early it is, you can ask the CCTS to arrange a panel, and they'll bring in experts from across the campus to help you design. We especially like to see it before it goes in. That way we can help you make final edits that may get you over the funding line. But if I'm asked to come in for the power calculation, I actually bring a red pen and underline each piece of the assumption that would be needed to replicate it. If a piece is missing, I'll hold it up and say, let me find, we need to clarify why this piece is not in here. All right? And with that, I want you to have a good weekend, and I'm giving you a whopping 11 minutes back. I'll ask Steve to send out, or John to send out those slides if you need me. You can always find me 10 to 2 on Mondays sitting on the edge of chaos.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
For everybody, Louise? First thing, I know the little scanner was broken when you came in or not working. Now it is working, so when you leave, you just badge in, so you get credit for being here. But my question is, I think of those early study design, almost like a seesaw, where you have very talented clinicians at the middle who they know the clinical relevance of their question. So you have a methodologist on one side saying, I need more people, and you have, if you bring in somebody, a patient representative or someone with real world knowledge on the other side saying, you can't get that many patients for X reasons. Have you ever seen it go really well, where the methodologist and the real world check work together to help?
That's one of the things. I know I've had that happens all the time. And one of the things I will do is they'll come back to the clinician and say things to them such as, all right, what things can I bring in to help explain variability? Should I adjust the calculations for sex? When I start adjusting, when you hear people start bringing in the term regression, or they use the term analysis of covariance, which is just a fancy word for regression. All we're trying to do is we're mathematically bringing the variance down. I'm using mathematical approaches to drive and get greater precision by driving the variance down. If I make the data less noisy, what happens to power? And that's the solution, is when we get into a situation where they say it's not feasible, then we start trying to find ways. It's not my first lever, it's usually my third lever to start doing covariate adjustment. Okay?
It's good to hear, just so it's not scary to think about bringing somebody in as that check when you have a talented methodologist, because you can find ways, and then what you get at the end is
the
really
best
solid.
science is, and it's kind of almost joke with Jeff, is, Jeff, if you want me to do a talk on team science, I can do a talk on team science. That's what I've been doing for 25 years. Sitting in rooms with individuals, sitting down and talking about the pros and cons of what's going on and how best to answer the scientific question to improve health, to improve practice. That's the goal. The goal is not for me to be right or to have the last say. The goal is always to do the best science possible. All right? Y'all have a great weekend.